As we mentioned, former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren will be side by side on the debate stage tonight. When it comes to these two, 57% of Democratic voters in early states describe Biden as a safe choice. 22% feel the same about Warren. That's according to our most recent CBS News Battleground tracker. However, opinion is flipped on the other end of the spectrum. 51% of those voters associate Warren with being exciting, and only 16% think Biden fits that bill. Anthony Salvanto joins me now. He's the director of elections and surveys for CBS News. Anthony, so which is it? Exciting, safe? Where are voters going to land? What do they really want in a candidate?
Yeah, well, it's as much about how they decide to choose, and that will ultimately lead to who they choose, right? So the things you just described, when we asked those questions, it came back with this big split, right? The safe versus risky. But it also came back as they thought Elizabeth Warren was exciting in comparison to Joe Biden with that safe choice. And a lot of what that describes tonight is whether they go with, there's Elizabeth Warren, progressive policies that are widely popular, or then Biden has argued back, and some other campaigns have said, well, wait a second, maybe those policies are too liberal to win in a general election.
So do you ask the voters, when faced with the choice between an exciting candidate or a safe candidate, which one would you choose?
No, we don't, because what we do is we stack them up independently so that people just rate the candidate in and of themselves, and then you can compare side by side. There are some studies that do that forced choice comparison, but we think at this point you just rate the candidates side by side, just by themselves, and then let the voters figure out when they actually vote which one matters more.
All right. It is a very low percentage, though, that think of Warren as a safe choice, which does not necessarily bode well, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's talk about her for a moment. She got a lot of attention for her Medicare for All plan. She finally came out and described how she was going to pay for it. So tonight, does she need to spend more time going through that, or would it behoove her more to talk about other issues? Is there a little bit of a Medicare for All fatigue at this point? People want to hear her on other positions.
One of the things that I was wondering was these last debates, we've all watched them. They've been really, really detailed, right? Yes. All the candidates going through all these specifics, how they're going to pay, okay. But we wondered if we felt voters were listening to a bigger picture, if they just wanted to hear candidates just describe the general direction in which they were going, or if they really did want to hear all those specifics. Right. And you know what they told us? They really wanted to hear specific details and costs.
All right, so vague platitudes aren't going to cut it. Yeah, because we've seen politicians ride vague platitudes all the way to the White House before.
Well, I don't know if, I don't know if larger goals is the same thing as vague platitudes. We haven't tested that. I'm supposing we asked, do you want vague platitudes? A lot of people would say no. But the larger point is there, which is that sometimes politicians and speeches try to lay out sort of a broader set of themes, or do people interpret specific policies as just in general, a general direction where they're going, even if they don't necessarily anticipate that those policies will get passed, right? They're symbolic in that way. But having said that, no, most voters told us they wanted those details. And I think in part that's because, look, health care has been something that the Democratic base has told us they've been concerned about for years. And in that regard, this election is no different.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about a candidate who's seeing a surge in support in some of these early voting states, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. What is it about him that is appealing to voters right now? And is this a good time in his campaign to get this energy? Right.
So first thing that strikes you is this big difference between how he's doing across all the early states, which is not as well as a Biden, a Warren, or even a Sanders, but how well he's doing in a place like Iowa, and the fact that he's rising in a place like New Hampshire. Part of what that tells you is, okay, he's campaigning there. We know he's spending money on advertising there, and that is paying off. In large part, that what we call the ground game, which means holding events, which means meeting voters.
But he's not the only candidate doing that. We know Kamala Harris is spending a lot of money in Iowa, so it means that there's something he's saying is also resonating.
Partly is that we talked about that exciting versus safe with a dichotomy, perhaps, and he does fairly well on being seen as exciting. And the other thing is that he's drawn support from Elizabeth Warren, and we watch and we re-interview people. To a larger extent, he's drawn that support more so than her support has left and gone to Bernie Sanders. one thing that tells you very quickly is that there are people out there switching around who aren't necessarily seeing this in strict ideological lanes. They're more looking for somebody maybe they can relate to, maybe that they just plain like.
So how do they see Pete Buttigieg in terms of a safe candidate?
Well, as you see here on the chart, his exciting number outweighs his risky number by a little bit, and to a larger extent, though, than his safe number. So, look, he's still largely not as known on the national stage. So partly debates like this are times when if people watch the news and they've heard us do these polls and say, oh, who's this person? He's not campaigning in my state, but I hear he's doing well in Iowa. And that's when they may tune in and take that really first look at somebody maybe they've otherwise just heard about.
All right, it'll be a fascinating night to see what goes on tonight. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for giving us a deep dive into some of the polls.